May 18, 1941, the Baltic seaport of Gotenhafen. The German battleship Bismarck slips her moorings at dawn, her 823-foot hull cutting through gray waters while Admiral Günther Lütjens raises his flag aboard the most powerful warship Nazi Germany has ever built. The objective is clear: break into the Atlantic Ocean and destroy British convoy routes that keep Britain's war effort alive. For 9 months, German propaganda had called Bismarck unsinkable. At 52,600 tons, fully loaded and armed with 8 15-inch guns capable of hurling 1,764-pound shells across 21 miles of ocean, she represented the pinnacle of German naval engineering and Adolf Hitler's personal vision of maritime supremacy. Her Krupp cemented armor plates, some weighing over 100 tons each, had been forged in the industrial furnaces of the Ruhr Valley, while her turbines generated enough power to propel her at 30 knots through the roughest Atlantic seas. The illusion of invincibility would last exactly 9 days. From the moment Bismarck's screws began turning in Gotenhafen harbor, the clock started ticking on what would become the most dramatic naval pursuit of World War II. A chase that would mobilize the entire British home fleet and forever change the strategic calculations of the Axis alliance. In the wardrooms of Italian submarines operating from the French port of Bordeaux, officers studied reports of German surface operations with growing concern about resource allocation and strategic priorities. Across the world in Tokyo, Japanese naval planners watched German surface fleet developments while privately questioning whether their European allies truly understood the future of naval warfare lay not with massive battleships, but with aircraft carriers and submarine operations. The confidence radiating from German naval high command in Berlin masked deeper tensions within the Axis partnership. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder had repeatedly urged Hitler to coordinate naval strategy with Japan and Italy, but the Führer's obsession with land-based operations in Europe left maritime cooperation fragmented and incomplete. Italian Admiral Angelo Parona, commanding submarine operations from Bordeaux, had requested German technical assistance for Mediterranean operations, only to be told that Kriegsmarine resources were committed to Atlantic surface operations. Meanwhile, Japanese Vice Admiral Naoki Nomura, serving as naval commissioner in Berlin, filed increasingly frustrated reports to Tokyo about German reluctance to share radar technology and submarine warfare innovations. These underlying strategic fractures would become critical as Bismarck's short operational life unfolded, but on the morning of May 18th, such concerns seemed secondary to the immediate tactical challenge of breaking through British naval patrols and reaching the open Atlantic. Captain zur See Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck's commanding officer, had drilled his 2,220-man crew relentlessly through the winter months, conducting gunnery exercises in the protected waters of the Baltic while German shipyard workers completed final modifications to the battleship's fire control systems and radar equipment. The heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen joined Bismarck as they cleared the Danish Straits, her sleek silhouette providing reconnaissance and anti-aircraft support for the larger vessel. 3 destroyers escorted the task force through the initial stages of the operation, their crews aware they were participating in what German propaganda proclaimed would be a decisive blow against British naval dominance. Radio transmissions between the ships crackled with technical updates about fuel consumption, weather conditions, and British patrol aircraft sightings as the small fleet navigated through increasingly dangerous waters. Unknown to the German crews, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had been monitoring German naval communications for months, and agents within the Swedish Navy had provided detailed technical specifications about Bismarck's capabilities to British intelligence services. The Royal Navy's Admiralty in London had been preparing contingency plans for exactly this scenario, with Admiral Sir John Tovey commanding the home fleet from his flagship HMS King George V while Force H steamed north from Gibraltar under Admiral James Somerville's command. The first critical mistake occurred on May 20th when the Swedish cruiser Gotland spotted the German task force in the Kattegat Strait and transmitted a position report that Swedish naval intelligence immediately shared with British contacts in Stockholm. Admiral Lütjens intercepted this transmission and realized their departure had been compromised, but rather than abort the mission or alter course significantly, he chose to continue with the planned route through Norwegian waters, believing speed and German air cover would provide sufficient protection against British interference. This decision reflected broader problems with Axis naval coordination that had been developing since the signing of the Tripartite Pact in September 1940. German naval strategy remained focused on European waters and Atlantic commerce raiding, while Japanese planning emphasized Pacific operations and the eventual confrontation with the United States Pacific Fleet. Italian naval operations, meanwhile, were increasingly constrained to the Mediterranean as British forces, based in Gibraltar and Alexandria, applied mounting pressure on Axis supply lines to North Africa. The lack of integrated planning became apparent as Bismarck proceeded north along the Norwegian coast. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft provided limited coverage, and no attempt was made to coordinate with Italian submarine operations or Japanese naval intelligence assets in European waters. German Naval High Command treated Operation Rheinübung as a purely national undertaking, despite the broader implications for Axis maritime strategy and resource allocation. Flying Officer Michael Suckling, piloting a lone Spitfire reconnaissance aircraft at 26,000 feet on May 21, photographed Bismarck and Prinz Eugen anchored in Grimstadfjord near Bergen, Norway. His high-altitude images, transmitted to British intelligence within hours, confirmed the German breakout and triggered the largest naval mobilization in Royal Navy history. Admiral Tovey immediately ordered HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales to intercept the German task force in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland, while additional forces moved to block alternative routes into the Atlantic. The British response demonstrated the type of coordinated naval operations that the Axis alliance had failed to achieve. Ships based in Scotland, Gibraltar, and Iceland received integrated operational orders, while aircraft from multiple commands provided reconnaissance and strike capabilities. Even Free French naval units and Canadian destroyers were incorporated into the pursuit force, creating a multinational effort that stood in stark contrast to the isolated German operation. Bismarck and Prinz Eugen entered the Denmark Strait during the evening of May 23, navigating through heavy fog and scattered icebergs, while British cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk maintained radar contact from maximum range. The weather conditions favored the German ships, with visibility often dropping below 1,000 yards, but British radar technology provided continuous tracking capability that German intelligence had underestimated. Corvettenkapitän Adalbert Schneider, commanding Prinz Eugen, reported to Admiral Lütjens that British radar pulses were being detected at regular intervals, indicating persistent shadowing by enemy vessels. The German ships altered course several times during the night, but Norfolk and Suffolk adjusted their positions accordingly, maintaining contact while transmitting detailed position reports to the approaching British battle force. At 0530 hours on May 24th, lookouts aboard Bismarck spotted smoke on the northern horizon as HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales approached at high speed, their battle ensigns streaming in the Arctic wind. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, commanding the British battle line from Hood's Bridge, had positioned his ships to maximize their forward firepower while minimizing exposure to German guns, but the approaching engagement would test both sides' gunnery skills under extremely challenging conditions. The Battle of the Denmark Strait began at 0553 hours when Hood opened fire from 25,000 yards, her 15-inch guns sending shells weighing nearly a ton each across the frigid waters toward the German task force. Prince of Wales followed 1 minute later, but initial British salvos fell short as range-finding calculations struggled with the difficult visibility conditions and rapidly changing distances between the opposing forces. Admiral Lütjens ordered both German ships to concentrate their fire on Hood, recognizing the British battlecruiser as the most dangerous opponent despite her lighter armor protection. Bismarck's main battery fired its first salvo at 0556 hours, while Prinz Eugen's 8-inch guns targeted the British flagship with armor-piercing shells designed to penetrate deck plating and detonate within the ship's vitals. The German gunnery proved devastatingly accurate. Within minutes, Prinz Eugen scored a direct hit on Hood's boat deck, starting a fierce fire near the mainmast that sent black smoke streaming across the British formation. Bismarck's third salvo straddled the British battlecruiser, sending massive columns of water over her superstructure as 15-inch shells detonated just short of their target. At exactly 0600 hours, as Hood began a turn to port to bring her afterguns to bear, Bismarck fired her fifth salvo. One armor-piercing shell, weighing 1,764 pounds and traveling at over 2,400 feet per second, struck Hood's deck armor at an angle that allowed it to penetrate between the mainmast and the after funnel. The shell passed through multiple deck levels before detonating in or near the after magazine spaces, where over 100 tons of cordite propellant were stored for the ship's 15-inch guns. The explosion that followed was visible for miles across the Denmark Strait. Hood's stern lifted completely out of the water as the magazine detonation broke her back, and within 8 minutes the pride of the Royal Navy had disappeared beneath the icy waters. Of her crew of 1,418 officers and men, only 3 survived: ordinary seaman Ted Briggs, able seaman Bob Tilburn, and midshipman William Dundas, picked up hours later by the destroyer HMS Electra. Prince of Wales, now facing both German ships alone, continued the engagement but quickly found herself outgunned and outmaneuvered. A 15-inch shell from Bismarck's forward turret struck the British battleship's bridge, killing or wounding nearly everyone present including Captain John Leach, who survived but was severely injured. Another German shell penetrated Prince of Wales' hull below the waterline, flooding several compartments and forcing damage control teams to work frantically to maintain stability. After 18 minutes of combat, Prince of Wales laid a smoke screen and withdrew, having scored 3 hits on Bismarck that would prove far more significant than anyone realized at the time. One 14-inch shell from Prince of Wales had struck Bismarck's bow, rupturing fuel tanks and allowing hundreds of tons of oil to leak into the sea. Another had damaged her forward radar, while the third had flooded several compartments and reduced her maximum speed by 2 knots. The immediate tactical victory belonged to Germany, but the strategic situation had already shifted decisively against the Axis powers. News of Hood's destruction reached London within hours, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill immediately ordered every available warship to join the pursuit of Bismarck. The loss of Britain's most famous warship triggered a national determination for revenge that would mobilize resources far beyond anything Admiral Lütjens had anticipated. More significantly for the broader Axis alliance, the engagement demonstrated fundamental problems with German naval strategy that would have lasting consequences for all 3 partner nations. The decision to risk Germany's most powerful battleship in a commerce raiding operation reflected the same strategic isolation that characterized Axis naval cooperation throughout the war. No attempt had been made to coordinate the operation with Italian submarine deployments or Japanese naval planning, despite the obvious implications for overall maritime strategy. Italian naval commanders, monitoring German radio communications from their submarine base at Bordeaux, realized that Bismarck's success or failure would directly impact resource allocation for Mediterranean operations. If German surface raiders proved effective in the Atlantic, Italian requests for additional U-boat support in the Mediterranean would likely be denied. Conversely, if Bismarck were lost, it might validate Italian arguments that submarine warfare offered better prospects than surface ship operations. Japanese naval observers reached similar conclusions from their perspective in the Pacific. The engagement between Bismarck and Hood demonstrated both the continued relevance of battleship firepower and the increasing importance of radar technology and coordinated air-sea operations. Japanese intelligence reports noted that British success in tracking Bismarck through difficult weather conditions suggested radar capabilities superior to German estimates, information that would prove crucial for future Pacific operations. Admiral Lütjens, unaware of the broader strategic implications, faced more immediate tactical challenges as Bismarck limped southward toward the French port of Saint-Nazaire. The oil leak from her damaged bow created a visible trail on the surface that British aircraft could follow, while reduced fuel capacity limited his operational options. Radio transmissions to German Naval High Command in Paris requested support from U-boats and Luftwaffe aircraft, but these forces were already committed to other operations and could provide only limited assistance. The pursuit that followed demonstrated both British naval capabilities and the isolation of German strategic planning. Norfolk and Suffolk maintained radar contact throughout May 24, despite Lütjens' attempts to shake them off through course changes and speed adjustments. Additional British forces converged on the Denmark Strait from multiple directions, including Admiral Tovey's main force with King George V and Repulse, while Force H steamed north from Gibraltar with the aircraft carrier Ark Royal and battlecruiser Renown. By evening on May 24, Bismarck was being shadowed by multiple British ships while additional forces moved to intercept her anticipated course toward France. The German battleship's isolation was complete, with no meaningful support available from Axis partners or even from other German naval units. This tactical isolation reflected the broader strategic problems that would plague Axis naval cooperation throughout the war. German Naval High Command's failure to coordinate with Italian and Japanese maritime forces left Bismarck fighting alone against an increasingly coordinated international response. British forces included ships and personnel from throughout the Commonwealth, while even neutral nations provided intelligence and logistical support. The contrast between integrated Allied operations and fragmented Axis responses would become a defining characteristic of the naval war. During the night of May 24, 25, Admiral Lütjens successfully broke radar contact with his British pursuers through a combination of course changes and electronic deception measures. For nearly 18 hours, Bismarck's location remained unknown to British forces, creating panic in London and forcing the Royal Navy to spread its search forces across thousands of square miles of ocean. The temporary escape demonstrated German naval capabilities, but also highlighted the fundamental problem with Operation Reinebung's strategic conception. Even if Bismarck had successfully evaded all British pursuit and reached the Atlantic shipping lanes, the impact on overall Axis strategy would have been limited without coordinated support from Italian and Japanese forces. German surface raiders could disrupt British commerce for brief periods, but they could not achieve the sustained pressure necessary to force strategic changes without integrated submarine and air operations from all three Axis partners. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, working with intercepted German radio transmissions, finally located Bismarck during the morning of May 26. A Catalina flying boat from No. 209 Squadron RAF, piloted by Flying Officer Dennis Briggs with an American observer aboard, spotted the German battleship approximately 700 miles west of Brest and transmitted her position to pursuing British forces. The discovery triggered the final phase of the chase, as swordfish torpedo bombers from HMS Ark Royal prepared for what would become the most important air attack of the pursuit. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond led 15 antiquated biplanes through deteriorating weather conditions, their open cockpits exposed to freezing spray and high winds as they approached Bismarck from multiple angles. The attack began at 20:47 hours on May 26, with swordfish aircraft dropping to wave top level while German anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with defensive fire. Most torpedoes missed their target or detonated harmlessly against Bismarck's armored hull, but one aircraft, flown by Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat, scored a crucial hit on the battleship's stern that jammed her rudder and sealed her fate. The torpedo strike, which occurred at 20:55 hours, damaged Bismarck's steering mechanism beyond repair and left her steaming in a large circle while British battleships closed for the final engagement. German damage control teams worked desperately to restore steering capability, but the complicated mechanical systems required for rudder operation had been completely destroyed by the torpedo's detonation. Admiral Lütjens transmitted his final operational message to German Naval High Command during the evening of May 26. Ship unmaneuverable. We shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer. The transmission was intercepted by British intelligence and confirmed that Bismarck was crippled and unable to escape the approaching British battle fleet. Throughout the night of May 26, 27, British destroyers from Captain Philip Vian's 4th Flotilla harassed the crippled German battleship with torpedo attacks that achieved no significant damage but prevented any possibility of escaping repairs. HMS Cossack, HMS Maori, HMS Sikh, and HMS Zulu took turns closing to torpedo range while Bismarck's secondary guns fired back, the muzzle flashes visible for miles across the dark Atlantic waters. The harassment attacks served multiple purposes beyond immediate tactical effect. They kept Bismarck's crew at action stations throughout the night, preventing rest or concentrated damage control efforts, while also providing the approaching British battle fleet with continuous position updates and tactical intelligence. German morale aboard Bismarck declined steadily as the reality of their situation became apparent to officers and enlisted men alike. At dawn on May 27th, Admiral Tovey's battle fleet arrived in position for the final engagement. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, accompanied by heavy cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, approached the crippled German battleship from multiple directions while maintaining careful coordination to avoid mutual interference with their gunfire. The weather remained challenging, with high winds and rough seas affecting gunnery accuracy for both sides. HMS Rodney opened fire at 0847 hours from a range of 25,000 yards, her 16-inch guns sending shells weighing over 2,000 pounds each toward Bismarck's superstructure. King George V followed seconds later, and the final battle of the German battleship began under gray skies with towering waves breaking over the combatants' decks. Bismarck's return fire proved ineffective from the beginning, as her damaged fire control systems and the rough seas prevented accurate ranging on the British ships. Her first salvos fell well short of their targets, while British shells began finding their mark with devastating effect. Rodney's third salvo scored direct hits on Bismarck's forward turret, silencing both 15-inch guns and killing most of the crew stationed in the armored barbette below. The British battleships methodically destroyed Bismarck's fighting capability over the following hour, with King George V targeting the superstructure while Rodney concentrated on the main armament. By 09:30 hours, all of Bismarck's main guns had been silenced. Her bridge structure was a smoking ruin, and fires burned throughout her hull. German crew members who attempted to man secondary weapons were killed by British shellfire or driven below by the intensity of the bombardment. Oberbootsman Hans Oels, the senior surviving officer aboard Bismarck, ordered the ship scuttled rather than allow her to be captured by British forces. Demolition charges were set in the engine rooms and magazines while surviving crew members prepared to abandon ship, though few lifeboats remained intact after nearly 2 hours of continuous bombardment. Heavy cruiser Dorsetshire closed to torpedo range and fired 3 weapons into Bismarck's hull, though post-war analysis would suggest that scuttling charges rather than torpedo damage caused the final flooding that sent the German battleship to the bottom. At 1040 hours on May 27, 1941, 9 days after departing Gotenhafen with such high expectations, Bismarck disappeared beneath the Atlantic waters. Of her crew of 2,220 officers and men, only 114 survived. Dorsetshire and destroyer Maori rescued 110 survivors from the frigid water before a U-boat alarm forced them to depart, leaving hundreds of German sailors to drown in the rough seas. 3 additional survivors were picked up by German U-boat U-74, while the weather ship Saxonwald rescued 2 more men from a life raft several days later. The strategic implications of Bismarck's loss extended far beyond the immediate tactical defeat. Within hours of receiving confirmation of the sinking, Adolf Hitler summoned Grand Admiral Raeder for a confrontation that would fundamentally alter German naval strategy and, by extension, the broader Axis approach to maritime warfare. Hitler's rage was absolute and immediate. In a meeting that witnesses described as one of the most intense confrontations between the Führer and his military advisors, Hitler declared the German surface fleet utterly useless and demanded that all major warships be decommissioned or relegated to training duties. Raeder's arguments about the psychological impact of surface raiders and their value in tying down British naval resources were dismissed with contempt. The decision effectively ended German surface operations in the Atlantic and forced a complete reallocation of naval resources toward U-boat construction and operations. Bismarck's sister ship Tirpitz would spend the remainder of the war in Norwegian fjords as a fleet in being, while other German capital ships were restricted to defensive operations in European waters. For the Axis alliance, the strategic implications were even more significant. German withdrawal from Atlantic surface operations left Italian naval forces to face British Mediterranean fleets without meaningful support, while Japanese naval planners realized that their European partners' surface fleet capabilities had been overestimated. The coordination problems that had characterized Operation Reinebung became a template for subsequent Axis naval operations, with each partner nation pursuing essentially independent strategies. Italian submarine commanders operating from Bordeaux reported that German technical support for Mediterranean operations was reduced immediately after Bismarck's loss, as Kriegsmarine resources shifted toward U-boat production and coastal defense preparations. Admiral Angelo Perona's requests for additional German submarines in the Mediterranean were denied, forcing Italian naval forces to confront British Mediterranean operations with increasingly limited resources. Japanese naval intelligence assessments, filed by Vice Admiral Nomura from Berlin, concluded that German surface fleet capabilities had been fundamentally compromised by the loss of Bismarck and the subsequent strategic changes imposed by Hitler. These reports influenced Japanese naval planning for the Pacific War, particularly regarding battleship operations and the coordination of surface forces with air and submarine units. The technical lessons learned from Bismarck's brief operational life also had lasting implications for all 3 Axis navies. German radar technology, which had failed to provide adequate early warning during the Denmark Strait engagement, was recognized as inferior to British systems. This information was shared with Japanese technical missions, but German reluctance to provide detailed specifications limited the value of such cooperation. Italian naval designers, studying reports of Bismarck's construction and loss, concluded that their own capital ship programs should emphasize speed and armor protection over pure firepower, leading to modifications in the design of battleships under construction. However, resource shortages and competing priorities meant that these lessons could never be fully implemented. The broader strategic impact of Operation Reinebung's failure extended beyond immediate naval considerations. The massive British effort required to sink Bismarck demonstrated both Royal Navy capabilities and the global nature of British maritime resources, information that influenced Axis planning for operations in other theaters. German intelligence assessments noted that British forces from throughout the Commonwealth had participated in the Bismarck chase, suggesting that attacks on British positions in other theaters might face similar coordinated responses. This analysis influenced German planning for operations in the Mediterranean and North Africa, where coordination with Italian forces became increasingly important as German naval resources were redirected toward U-boat operations. Japanese strategic planning was affected even more significantly. The demonstration of British ability to coordinate naval operations across vast ocean areas provided crucial intelligence about likely American capabilities in the Pacific, where similar coordination problems would have to be overcome. The isolation that characterized Bismarck's final days offered a preview of the strategic challenges that would face Japanese naval forces once the United States entered the war. The human cost of Operation Reinebung extended beyond the immediate casualties aboard Bismarck and Hood. German naval morale, which had been built up through months of propaganda about battleship invincibility, suffered a devastating blow that would affect Kriegsmarine operations throughout the remainder of the war. British naval confidence, conversely, received a crucial boost that would influence subsequent operations in all theaters. The technical performance of various weapon systems during the engagement provided valuable intelligence for all three Axis navies, though the information was not always shared effectively between partners. German 15-inch guns had proved highly effective against British armor protection, while British radar technology had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded German intelligence estimates. Most significantly, the engagement demonstrated the continuing importance of air power in naval operations, a lesson that would prove crucial for future Pacific operations. The torpedo attack that disabled Bismarck was carried out by obsolete aircraft operating in challenging weather conditions, yet proved more decisive than hours of surface combat between the most powerful warships of their era. The aftermath of Bismarck's sinking reverberated through Axis strategic planning for months afterward. German resources that had been allocated for surface ship construction were redirected toward U-boat production, while Italian naval operations in the Mediterranean had to proceed without the German surface support that had been anticipated. Japanese naval planners, studying German experiences, concluded that future Pacific operations would require much closer coordination between surface, submarine, and air forces than their European partners had achieved. The strategic isolation that characterized Operation Reinebung became a template for subsequent Axis naval operations throughout World War II. Each partner nation continued to pursue essentially independent maritime strategies, with coordination limited to occasional intelligence sharing and technical exchanges that never approached the level of integration achieved by Allied forces. Within the German Navy itself, the loss of Bismarck triggered a fundamental reassessment of surface warfare doctrine that would influence all subsequent operations. The idea that individual powerful units could achieve strategic objectives through commerce raiding was abandoned in favor of coordinated submarine campaigns that offered better prospects for sustained pressure on Allied supply lines. The British success in sinking Bismarck also validated strategic decisions that would prove crucial for the broader conduct of the war. The willingness to commit overwhelming resources to eliminate a single enemy unit demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that would characterize Allied operations throughout the conflict, while the integration of forces from multiple commands and nations provided a model for future coalition warfare. For the crews who participated in the final chase and battle, the experience provided lasting memories of naval warfare at its most intense level. British sailors who witnessed Bismarck's final moments reported a mixture of satisfaction at avenging Hood and respect for German courage in fighting to the end. The few German survivors carried with them knowledge of both German naval capabilities and the devastating effectiveness of coordinated British response operations. The wreck of Bismarck, located by oceanographer Robert Ballard in 1989, rests nearly 16,000 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 300 miles west of Brest. The condition of the wreck suggests that both British gunfire and German scuttling charges contributed to her final destruction, resolving a debate that had continued for decades after the engagement. The technical analysis of Bismarck's design and performance, conducted by naval architects from all major maritime powers after the war, revealed both the strengths and limitations of German battleship construction philosophy. Her armor protection and compartmentalization had enabled her to absorb tremendous punishment while remaining afloat, but her steering systems and fire control equipment proved vulnerable to relatively minor damage that could compromise her entire fighting capability. These lessons influenced post-war naval architecture and tactical doctrine for decades, with particular emphasis on redundancy in critical systems and the integration of surface units with air and submarine support. The isolation that doomed Bismarck became a textbook example of the dangers facing naval forces operating without adequate coordination and support. The 9 days of Operation Rheinübung, from departure to destruction, thus marked not only the end of German surface operations in the Atlantic, but also the effective collapse of coordinated Axis naval strategy. The strategic decisions that followed Bismarck's loss would influence the conduct of the war in all theaters, as each Axis partner was forced to confront the reality that maritime warfare had become too complex and resource-intensive for independent national strategies. The legacy of those 9 days in May 1941 extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. For Germany, it marked the end of surface fleet ambitions and the beginning of total reliance on submarine warfare. For Britain, it demonstrated both the global reach of British naval power and the effectiveness of coordinated response operations that would characterize Allied strategy throughout the war. For the Axis alliance as a whole, Operation Rheinübung revealed fundamental flaws in strategic coordination that would never be fully resolved. The isolation that characterized Bismarck's final cruise became emblematic of broader problems with Axis cooperation, contributing to the ultimate failure of the tripartite partnership to achieve its strategic objectives. In the end, the claim that Bismarck was unsinkable proved to be not merely wrong but catastrophically misleading. The 9 days from her departure to her destruction marked not the beginning of German naval dominance but rather the effective end of coordinated Axis maritime strategy, a strategic failure that would influence the course of World War II in theaters far from the cold waters of the North Atlantic where the pride of the German Navy met her fate.